Historic Wimbledon was just the beginning. Alex Eala wants much more, because for the girl who once trained on a basketball court painted over with tennis lines, one Grand Slam breakthrough was never going to be enough. She just beat a defending champion on the most famous court in tennis. She just made history for an entire nation, and in her own words, she's already told the world exactly what she's coming for next. This is the story of how far Alex Eala has come and how far she still plans to go. Before there was center court, there was concrete. Before there were ball boys and line judges and 15,000 people holding their breath, there was a basketball court in Quezon City, Philippines, with tennis lines painted over the top of it. That is where Alex Eala's story actually begins. Not in a glamorous academy in Europe, not on manicured grass, but on a surface that had to pretend to be something it wasn't, because the real thing simply didn't exist where she grew up. Tennis was never supposed to be a Filipino sport at the elite level. The country had never produced a Grand Slam quarterfinalist, man or woman. Grass courts in particular were almost a foreign concept. The Philippines barely has any. And yet somewhere on that painted-over court, a young girl was already dreaming bigger than her surroundings would suggest was reasonable. By the time she was a teenager, Eala's talent had become impossible to ignore. She earned a spot at the Rafael Nadal Academy in Mallorca, Spain, trained in the same environment, under the same rigorous standards that shaped one of the greatest champions the sport has ever seen. When she graduated from the academy 3 years ago, she stood beside Nadal himself and Iga Swiatek, who had been invited as the guest of honor that year. Neither Eala nor anyone else in that room could have predicted what would happen years later on the very courts of Wimbledon between the graduate and the guest. Her family gave her the foundation to dream that big in the first place. Her mother, Riza, was a competitive swimmer who represented the Philippines at the Southeast Asian Games. Her father kept a low profile, while an uncle carved out his own name in Philippine basketball. It was a household built on discipline, humility, and sport, but nothing in that household could have fully prepared anyone for what Eala would eventually do on the world's biggest stage. By 2025, the breakthrough had begun. She scored the first ever Grand Slam match win by a Filipino player at the US Open, toppling Clara Tauson in the first round. It was history, but Eala made clear even then that she didn't see it as a finish line. Asked about her long-term ambitions, she said her answer had always been the same: to win slams and to be world number one. She called herself ambitious, but insisted she was taking her rise one step at a time rather than fixating on a single career goal. That mindset, patient, grounded, but quietly ferocious, is exactly what carried her into 2026. Nobody outside tennis circles knew her name yet. That was about to change in the most dramatic way imaginable, on a Saturday afternoon in London, against a woman who had lifted the Wimbledon trophy the year before. Nobody outside the Philippines had even heard her name a week earlier. By the end of that match, the entire tennis world would know exactly who Alex Eala was. On July 4, 2026, Alex Eala walked onto center court to face Iga Swiatek, the reigning Wimbledon champion, a 3-time Grand Slam winner, and, on paper, one of the most dominant forces in the sport. Eala was the 29th seed, Swiatek was the 3rd seed, and the woman nobody wanted to draw in the 3rd round. This was supposed to be a formality. It wasn't. Eala came out swinging, literally. Her lefty forehand, the shot that scouts had been raving about for years, was landing exactly where it needed to. She took the first set in a tiebreaker, 7-6-9, before closing out the match 6-2 in the second. When the final point landed, Alex Eala had done something no Filipino tennis player, man or woman, had ever done. She had reached the second week of a Grand Slam. What happened next is the part that turned a great result into a viral moment. In her on-court interview, with the crowd still buzzing, Ayala's voice cracked. She looked back at the version of herself who used to dream about exactly this kind of opportunity. She said she had dreamed of moments like this so many times, and that when a chance like it arrives, you have to take it, because it's a blessing. She wasn't performing for the cameras. She was, for a moment, simply a young woman overwhelmed by the distance between where she started and where she was now standing. Tennis analysts didn't hold back either. Former British #1 Greg Ruzetsky, watching from the commentary booth, said what a lot of people were suddenly thinking. He predicted she would win a Wimbledon championship one day and potentially reach the top 5 in the world. He praised her ground strokes, her tenacity, and more than anything, her composure under pressure, arguing it was Swiatek, not Eala, who looked like the nervous one out there. For Eala, the win wasn't just about the scoreline, it was about identity. She explained afterward that she hadn't grown up on grass in the Philippines, that her home court had literally been a basketball surface repainted with tennis lines. Now here she was, thriving on the fastest, most unforgiving surface in the sport, on the most famous court in the world. Was this a fluke, a one-off spark of magic that would fade the moment reality set back in? Or was this the sound of a new era in women's tennis quietly announcing itself? The tennis world was about to find out, because up next stood another dangerous opponent, one who had already tasted Grand Slam finals heartbreak and was determined not to let this Filipino underdog write the next chapter of her story. But history doesn't wait around to be appreciated. Just 48 hours later, Eala was back on center court, this time with an entire country watching, an entire fan base suddenly paying attention for the first time, and one more brutal test standing between her and a Grand Slam quarterfinal she had never even dreamed of reaching before that week. By the time Monday arrived, something had shifted. Alex Eala wasn't just a name in the draw anymore. She was a phenomenon. Back home in the Philippines, watch parties were being organized in public arenas. In Pasig City, thousands of fans gathered to watch her next match on a giant screen, a scene more common for basketball finals than a tennis fourth-round matchup. For a country with almost no tradition of elite tennis success, Eala had become something close to a national obsession overnight. It wasn't just local. Her fan base had already been quietly building abroad, particularly among the large Filipino diaspora community in Southern California, ever since her Indian Wells debut earlier in the year. After the Swiatek win, that fan base exploded globally. Casual fans who had never watched a tennis match in their lives were suddenly subscribing to streaming services just to catch her matches live. What made the moment resonate wasn't only the winning, it was the way Eala talked about what the winning meant. In her Wimbledon press conference, she spoke about carrying a responsibility that came with the platform she'd built. She said the discipline of putting in the work day after day alongside her team was what kept her grounded and locked in. It wasn't a rehearsed soundbite. Reporters who cover her regularly noted that this authenticity, more than any single shot in her arsenal, was what made her impossible not to root for. And she made a point of being careful with how she wanted young fans, especially young girls, to interpret her rise. She explained it was an honor to help pave the way for young girls, calling it the honor of her life to be able to inspire others. But she was equally clear that she didn't want her story to become a script others simply copied. Her message, in her own words, was that she wanted people to look at her and say they wanted to be the first me. Meanwhile, the tennis establishment kept piling on the praise. Commentators and former players lined up to talk about her tennis IQ, her mental fortitude, her fearless baseline game. The kind of language usually reserved for players already deep into their careers was now being described by a 21-year-old who just a year earlier had lost in the opening round of Wimbledon to the very champion she just dethroned. But amid all the celebration, there was a warning buried in the storyline too, one that anyone who follows sports closely could recognize. Viral moments are intoxicating, but viral moments don't win tournaments. Standing between Eala and the quarterfinals was a former Wimbledon finalist who had spent the entire season searching for exactly this kind of signature win to reignite her own career, Jasmine Paolini. Every fairy tale eventually meets its test. For Alex Eala, that test came wearing an Italian flag, a former finalist's pedigree, and absolutely no interest in becoming a footnote in someone else's underdog story. On July 6, 2026, Alex Eala walked back onto center court to face Jasmine Paolini for a place in the Wimbledon quarterfinals. The two had met only once before, back in February at the Dubai Tennis Championships, where Eala had won comfortably in straight sets. History appeared to favor her. But grass is a different animal than hard court, and Paolini, a former Wimbledon finalist herself in 2024, was a completely different kind of opponent on this surface. It became an instant battle. Paolini broke serve early to take the first set 6-4. Eala answered back, fighting through pressure to level things at one set apiece, taking the second 6-4 herself. The match had turned into precisely the kind of roller coaster that Grand Slam second weeks are built from. 2 hours of shifting momentum, in front of a crowd that included Roger Federer, Billie King, and a royal box full of legends watching two next-generation stars collide. In the deciding set, fine margins mattered more than anything else. Both players held serve deep into the third set, before Paolini finally broke through at 5-3, closing out a hard-fought 6-4, 4-6, 6-3 victory. Eala's historic run had come to an end, not through collapse, but through combat. It had taken every ounce of Paolini's experience and composure to get the job done. For Paolini, the win meant something bigger than just advancing to the next round. It represented a return to form after a difficult season. She admitted it had been a roller coaster year, one that had tested her in ways she hadn't fully expected, crediting her team for helping her push through the tough moments. She spoke about the importance of simply enjoying her tennis again, calling that enjoyment her real superpower. For Eala, the loss stung, but it didn't define her. In her post-match press conference, she was refreshingly honest about the moment. She admitted there were so many positives to take from the tournament despite the disappointing result. She talked candidly about how her serve simply wasn't at its best that day, and how every player, no matter how talented, has days where their best tennis doesn't show up. It would have been easy for a 21-year-old riding an emotional high to crumble under the weight of a big loss on the biggest stage. Instead, Eala did something far rarer in professional sports. She processed the defeat with maturity, refusing to let one match erase everything the tournament had already proven about her. The dream run was over, but something more important, her belief in what came next, was only just getting started. So here's the real question. What happens after the fairy tale ends? Does the story quietly fade, the way so many breakout runs do? Or does it become the launching pad for something even bigger? Alex Eala's own words leave very little room for doubt. If you only watched the highlight reels, you might think that Alex Eala's story peaked at Wimbledon 2026. But listen closely to what she's actually said in her own interviews, and a very different picture emerges. One of a player who sees this tournament not as a mountaintop, but as base camp. Back before Wimbledon even began, Eala had already laid out her long-term vision with startling clarity. Asked directly about her blue sky goals for the future, she said the answer had always been the same for her: to win Grand Slams and to become world number one. She acknowledged that dream is shared by nearly every rising player on tour, but she said it with a conviction that made it clear she genuinely believed she belonged in that conversation, not just as an aspiration, but as a realistic target. What separates Eala from countless other next big things in tennis is the patience wrapped around that ambition. She has repeatedly said she's trying to take her career one step at a time, resisting the urge to fixate on a single distant goal while the day-to-day work still needs doing. That balance, sky-high ambition paired with grounded discipline, is exactly what her team and those around her point to when explaining why her rise hasn't produced the kind of burnout or inconsistency that derails so many young prospects. The numbers back up the trajectory too. Entering this Wimbledon, Eala was ranked outside the world's top 30. After her run to the fourth round, her ranking is set to climb to a new career high. With relatively few points to defend across the remainder of the season, analysts believe a top 20 finish to 2026 is realistic, and some believe she could push even higher. Even Rusetsky's bold on-air prediction that she'll win a Wimbledon title and reach the top 5 in the world one day wasn't dismissed by the tennis world as hyperbole. It was treated as a genuinely plausible forecast, precisely because of what everyone had just watched her do to a defending champion. But perhaps the most important part of Eala's ambition isn't about rankings or trophies at all. It's about representation. She has been unusually thoughtful about what her success means for an entire country and region that has never had a tennis star of this caliber before. She isn't just chasing personal glory, she's trying to prove that greatness in this sport can come from anywhere, even from a painted-over basketball court in Quezon City. So when she says Wimbledon 2026 was just the beginning, it isn't a marketing line. It's a documented pattern, one interview, one press conference, one honest answer at a time, of a young athlete who has been telling everyone exactly where she's headed. The only question left is whether the rest of women's tennis is ready for it. Every great sports story eventually asks the same question: what will this person's legacy actually be? For Alex Eala, the answer might not be about the trophies at all. Alex Eala's Wimbledon 2026 run wasn't the end of a story. It was the opening chapter of one that's still being written by an athlete who has told us, in her own words, exactly how big she intends this story to become. If this breakdown of her rise resonated with you, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, because Alex Eala's next chapter is coming, and you won't want to miss how it unfolds.